Miles Carter was 44 years old and had taught media literacy to high schoolers long enough to watch the internet grow fangs. He kept his classroom clock 5 minutes fast because teenagers and algorithms move the same way. If you didn't plan for their momentum, you'd be late to your own life. On a Tuesday in late October, when the maples on Riverside Street were busy dropping their last stubborn leaves, and the marching band practiced a Halloween medley on the football field, Miles sat in his quiet classroom grading essays about online hoaxes. He leaned back, rubbed the small scar beneath his jaw he'd gotten as a kid climbing the fence behind the Carnegie Library, and opened an email that had slipped past the spam filters. Subject: do you want to see the thing that makes them watch? There was no address, just a thumbnail of a paused video showing an ordinary desktop. The play bar read 1 minute and 19 seconds. He should have deleted it. Instead, he clicked. A cursor wobbled across the screen. A folder opened to reveal 4 files named after common fears: being watched, losing control, not being heard, and alone. The cursor hovered. Click the first one. The video cut to grainy footage of a school hallway, empty except for lockers and a reflection that didn't match the camera's movement. The second file played a distorted recording of a woman speaking about insomnia, while pop-up notifications interrupted her mid-sentence with the same face displayed in different windows. The third showed someone clicking an undo command that made their hands move backward while their reflection in the monitor didn't follow. The fourth was a dark room with a soft mechanical hum. And then a whisper: the screen door is open. The video ended. No explanation. No sign-off. Miles closed his laptop and realized he was holding his breath. He had spent a decade teaching teenagers how to spot manipulation crop filters, deepfakes. The quiet power of the crop itself, and his rule of thumb was simple: if a thing demands you don't look away, take 3 steps back. But it was already late. The band had gone home, and the light outside had settled into that gray-blue Midwestern dusk that reminded him of his mother's old Kodak film photos, soft around the edges. He forwarded the email to his own private account, added a note for tomorrow's lesson plan, and told himself it was for the kids. Then he walked to his sedan, drove past the shuttered storefronts of old downtown Monroe, and turned into the driveway of his clipped one-story, where the storm door always latched shut. The storm door was open. It was a small tina screen door nudged by wind, and yet it set his teeth on edge. He closed it fast, locked the deadbolt, and told himself it was the latch. Sleep came in fits. He dreamed he was at school, opening the classroom door to find the hallway alive with the low murmur of laptop fans. In the morning, he told the first period seniors he had a treat. Creepypasta, he said, chalk squeaking on the board. The internet's folk tales. The kind you copy and paste. There were nods. A few smirks. A hand shot up from the back row. It belonged to a girl who sat with her shoulders defensively squared and her hair cut close. A freshman who'd been fast-tracked into his class on a teacher's recommendation. MS. Valencia, he said. Callie, she corrected absently. Did you see the thing last night? The hallway video? Miles felt the hair on his forearms rise. Which thing? He asked, aiming for neutral. It's trending, Callie said. Everyone's duetting with it and saying it's shot in their school. But I think it started on a channel called Null Return. It has one video only, and it's getting copied. Miles kept his face calm. Interesting. Let's talk about why these spread. He logged into the smartboard, and for the next 40 minutes, they discussed how fear traveled faster than corrections. The kids were good at it. They knew the words confirmation bias, virality, uncanny valley, and they still loved stories that pretended to be true. After class, Callie lingered. My uncle went missing, she said with the urgency of someone lobbing a topic into the world to see if it landed. 4 years ago. Left work late. Never came home. We don't talk about it much. But last night, I watched a video my cousin sent, and one of the pop-ups had a name in it. Eli Valencia. It's my uncle's name. What did the pop-up say? Miles asked. It was quick. She said, like it didn't want to be seen. It said, the screen door is open. Miles felt something he hadn't felt since his reporting days, when he'd chased a lead too far and had to find his way back to the facts, a nervous excitement that came with the illusion you might solve things. Can you forward me the video? He asked gently. And listen, I am sorry about your uncle. Callie nodded. Brittle. My aunt says I'm making connections that aren't there. She says that's what the internet does. But I think someone is doing this on purpose. After school, Miles took his rusted bicycle down from the garage hooks and rode the old trail along the river that ended behind the Carnegie Library. The same fence where he'd cut his jaw 30 years ago. The library had been renovated last year with glass and brushed steel that slid over the original brick like a phone case. Inside, it smelled like paper and lemon cleaner. He climbed to the second-floor computer lab. It was busy in the way libraries get busy, a communal quiet with sound tucked into set-aside corners. He searched the channel that Callie had mentioned. Null Return had one video, 1 minute. 19. The description read, the screen door is open. He clicked and watched. It was nearly identical to the email he'd received, but cleaner. He froze frames and logged timestamps. The hallway reflection that didn't match the camera movement was from 0:12 to 0:19. The woman's voice, the insomnia tape, ran from 0:24 to 0:32, punctuated by notifications that blurred too fast to read. He slowed the video to a crawl. The pop-ups bloomed. Names flashed for less than a frame. A. Minogue. D. Nguyen. And there. Add 0:29. In the upper right corner, buried beneath an icon for a cloud backup. A name, Eli Valencia. He took a screenshot and wrote the time in his notebook. Then he did something he knew better than to do. He opened the comments. They were several thousand deep. A churn of speculation and meta-commentary. People claimed to see themselves reflected. Others posted their own edited proof. There were sincere pleas and prankster dares, and a subset of users treating the whole thing like an alternate reality game, with a spreadsheet tracking every name that flashed. The top pinned comment belonged to an account called Hard Meadow. If your name is in the pop-ups, check your screen door. Miles typed to Hard Meadow, I'm looking into this for my media literacy class. Can you tell me where the video originated? Instead of an answer, he got a notification. Hard Meadow had sent a private message. The origin is here. The message contained an address across town, near the deserted strip of warehouses that used to make roller bearings before the factory moved to Oklahoma. He should have ignored it. He closed the laptop and walked to the picture window that looked out over the library lawn, where a family was eating ice cream at a picnic table. He remembered being their age. His mother warning him about the newspaper's daily dozen. The front page blotter his grandmother swore would give you nightmares if you read it before bed. We traded gut shots then, he thought. Newsprint for blue light. Different cut. Same bleed. He wrote the address down anyway. On his way home, he took the long route past the warehouses. The address was real. A brick building with boarded windows and a metal door chained shut. Someone had spray-painted a clean circle on the door, the kind graph writers used to mark a spot for a future piece. The circle was perfect and wrong at once, off-center like an eye that couldn't agree with its twin. He craned up on tiptoes and peered through a gap in the plywood. Dark inside, a smell like old motor oil and wet cardboard. When he got home, he found the screen door open again. He did not sleep. Instead, he sat at the kitchen table with a cup of black coffee he didn't drink and the old VHS tape player he kept for class demonstrations. He dug through the hall closet and found a tape his mother had labeled Family Picnic 1991. He slid it in and the TV came alive with wavering lines and the squeal of static. Then his father's low laugh and his mother's hand, quickly covering the lens to wave hello. His father had passed the previous winter, while he and Miles had not agreed on much those last year's politics. Religion. What counted as a good day they had agreed on this. The stories we tell about ourselves can save us or sink us. But we tell them anyway because silence was a kind of lie. He let the tape play on mute while he watched the null return video on his laptop. The two screens mirroring each other like a house of reflections. On the TV, his younger self ran toward the camera with a plastic sword. On the laptop, the hallway shimmered. He slowed the pop-up names again and took stills, organizing them in a folder. At 1:06, when the hum in the dark room got louder, the video glitched to a single frame of a login screen with a username that flashed and gone. Miles caught it by reflex, a reporter's snapped instinct. The frame said, admin_null_return. He read the name out loud to the empty kitchen, and it sounded like a dare. The next morning, he got to school early. He printed an assignment packet and slid it on each desk, dissecting a viral horror. He clipped his scar on the door latch and bled enough to need the nurse's Band-Aid drawer. The seniors shuffled in with their energy drinks and their hoodies and their easy cynicism. Callie took her seat and did not look at him. Today, Miles said, we separate effect from intent. Not just what a thing does, but why it wants to do it. They worked in teams. One group cataloged the tropes, isolation, surveillance, corrupted memory. Another traced the platforms. Callie's group handled origin. She took it like a job, posted a spreadsheet, and within minutes they had a timeline reconstructed via internet archaeology. The first mention of the screen door phrase had appeared 6 weeks earlier in a Reddit thread about home security footage, then migrated to TikTok as a whisper, then to Instagram as a direct-to-camera confessional where creators filmed themselves saying the phrase and jolting as their notifications pinged in unison. It's a recursive loop, Callie said, tapping the screen. The story creates signs of the story to legitimize the story. It's clever and gross. Miles nodded. Who benefits? Someone who wants reach, said a quiet boy who wore a Detroit Lions cap year-round. Or someone who wants to make a point. Point about what? Miles pressed. About how we look for patterns. The boy said. About how we're hungry to star in our own nightmares. At lunch, Miles ate in the faculty lounge and debated whether to report the warehouse address to the police. On one hand, it could be nothing, a prank within a prank. On the other, Callie's uncle's name tracing through a pop-up felt like more than a dart thrown at a phone book. He took out his phone and called the one person he trusted with delicate lines. Her name was Jamie Quinn, a city beat reporter he'd known since his own Stringer days. She answered on the second ring. I figured you were calling about the thing, she said. No hello needed. Half the newsroom is doom-scrolling it. Have you heard of an account called Hard Meadow? He asked. Only when my editor told us not to chase anything related to it without me or legal reading. Jamie said, What's up? He described the address. She was silent a long moment. I ran a story last winter on an eviction sweep near there. She said, the building owner is a holding company that's owned by another holding company. But the property manager is a guy named Whitaker, and I've had the pleasure of his voicemail. Could this be a stunt? Miles asked. Like for a horror podcast? It could, Jamie said. It could also be someone who thinks real fear is a fair price for clicks. Listen, don't go poking around there alone. Poking is a strong word. Miles said. You never could resist a story. Jamie said. Not unkindly. That used to be your best quality. After school, he told himself he'd drive past the warehouse one more time. That he'd keep his hands in his pockets and his feet on the sidewalk. He parked on the street. The wind carried that heavy, cold smell of late October Michigan, water holding its breath before hard freeze. A young man in a neon beanie stood by the warehouse door, smoking a vape. Miles recognized him only because he had graded his older brother 10 years ago. "Cameron?" Miles said cautiously. The kid smiled like a dare. "Didn't expect to see you here. Mr. C. Research for a class." Miles said. "What brings you?" "Influencer bait," Cameron said cheerfully. "I'm live on 3 platforms. The comments want me to open the screen door." He gestured to the metal warehouse door like a showman. "Check it. We found it like this 20 minutes ago." The chain was gone. In its place, the door hung a quarter open. A rectangle of darkness yawned. "You shouldn't go in," Miles said. Cameron stepped back in a theatrical bow. "Then you do it." He said into his phone with the sing-song of someone courting an audience. "Ladies and gents, this is my high school media teacher. If a horror movie had an uncle, he'd be it." "Turn it off," Miles said, the firmness in his voice shocking them both. Cameron hesitated. He didn't turn it off, but he lowered the phone. A second figure emerged from the alley. A woman in her 30s with a weathered jean jacket and a camera bag. She slid between them with a practiced nod. "Relax," she said, voice low. "We're not going to do anything stupid." "Jamie," Miles breathed. She grinned sidelong. "You look like you could use a chaperone." They stood in the doorway, staring into the dark. It was cooler inside and smelled like dust and damp sheetrock. Jamie clicked on a penlight. The beam cut a slice through the dark and found a bank of folding tables stacked with monitors. Screens all turned off. A power strip lay on the floor like a snake playing dead. There were empty pizza boxes, a few plastic water bottles, one with a lipstick smudge, and a whiteboard with a list written in neat block letters. Provoke. Polarize. Proof. Public relations for a haunting, Jamie said, photographing the board. Or politics. Same playbook, Miles muttered. A sound came from the far side of the room. A slow whirring, like a computer waking from sleep. Jamie swung the light. At the back, a single monitor glowed. Someone was sitting in front of it. A woman with dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. Wearing a navy hoodie with a small embroidered logo, Whitaker Management. She did not turn when they approached. "Hello," Miles said, keeping his voice gentle but loud enough to carry. "We don't mean trouble." "You brought a parade," the woman said without turning. "That's trouble." "We're teachers," Miles said, "and a reporter." "And a content creator," Cameron said, lifting the phone again, then lowering it when Jamie shot him a glare that could curdle milk. The woman sighed. "You weren't supposed to find this place so soon," she said, finally turning. She had a long, clever face and a watchfulness that suggested she'd been the smartest person in many underpaid rooms. Her eyes flicked to Cameron's phone. "Do not stream me," she said. "I will drop your signal from orbit." "What is this?" Jamie asked, moving to the monitors. "A farm for fear?" The woman smiled without humor. "You make it sound shabby. It's an installation. It's a study. It's a proof of concept." "Of what?" Miles asked. "Of what the network wants," she said. "You think your students change the internet, but the internet changes them right back." She waved toward the active monitor. A console was open, lines of code and a map with glimmering dots. "We seeded a phrase in corners where lonely people linger," she said. "We watched it crawl and attach. We learned where to nudge it to climb. The trick is to let the audience tell the story to themselves." "That's morally bankrupt," Jamie said flatly. "That's accurate," the woman said. "But I don't work in morals. I work in outcomes. So do you? If we're being honest. That's what makes newsrooms cut the night desk and flood the front page with live blogs. That's what makes a teacher open an email he should have deleted because he told himself it was for the kids. Miles felt the floor under him tilt. What about the names in the pop-ups? He asked. The ones you hid for a frame. Eli Valencia. Others. The woman's face changed. Just a flicker. We scraped names from court transcripts, missing persons databases, and local webzines. She said, we are very good at scraping. We wanted a sense of history, an illusion of weight. Sometimes we used names with no hits so people could project. Sometimes we used names that hit, to make the project stick. Miles thought of Callie, her calm voice. The way she had said the words my uncle and missing, and I think someone is doing this on purpose. He stepped closer. You took a real family's pain and used it to build your installation. We told a story with the materials at hand. The woman said, cool. You of all people know that. Not like this, he said. She tilted her head. Are you certain? Where is your boss? Jamie asked, scanning the corners. Whitaker. This looks like his money. You think men like Whitaker know what they build? The woman said. He likes renting square footage to projects that look like growth. He looks at his spreadsheets and tells investors we are incubating the future. I do the building. Because I know how to make magnets for human attention. I know the ratio of novelty to dread. I could have sold this to a security company as a scare sales funnel. Instead, I want to know what happens when the story leaves the laboratory. What happens? Miles said, is harm. Harm is a word people use when they lose control of the narrative. The woman said, there is no control. There is only our ability to surf the wave or drown. Jamie's penlight fell on another whiteboard. This one had charts follower counts. Watch time. Referral sources. There was a section labeled school penetration with a list of districts, including theirs. You aimed this at kids? Jamie said. Aim is imprecise. The woman said. The network finds the path of least resistance. And we hire interns to guide the river. Who are you? Cameron blurted. Like, your actual name. The woman glanced at him with mild amusement. My name is Lynn Walker. She said. I used to run social for a nonprofit that went broke. Then I ran growth for a company that built an app that made teenagers less lonely by making them lonelier together. Then I moved home to take care of my father after his stroke. He died. I kept working. The world kept needing my skill set. You're the one behind Null Return. Miles said. I'm the one showing you the screen door. She said. You're the one deciding whether to step through. Close it. Miles said. Close it now. Take the video down. You can't put a story back in a box. Lynn said, turning back to the screen. But sometimes you can tell a better one until it wins. Miles looked at Jamie, then at Cameron, who had gone pale and set his phone face down on the table like a sacrament. He thought of Callie, the row of earnest faces leaning in while he spoke about media literacy, like it could keep them safe. He thought of his father's steady hands on a tripod, his mother's laugh on the VHS tape, the fragile, unbroken circle of a family that had believed a door could be shut. Then we tell it. He said, we tell the truth. Lynn smiled in a way that made Miles think of swimming in a cold lake, shock followed by numbness. The truth isn't the story people want. She said, the truth is rarely the story the network rewards. Maybe not, Jamie said, raising her camera, but I still have a paper that runs on mornings. They left with photos, file names, and the kind of quotes that don't read like confession until they sit in a column under a headline and the town recognizes its own silhouette. Jamie promised she'd run it through legal and not bury the lead. Cameron promised, sheepishly, to edit his live into a piece about how easy it is to become someone else's amplifier. Miles drove home and closed his screen door and checked it twice. The story ran on Sunday. It got less traction than any of them expected. The comments were hopeful and then not. A group who had adored the mysterious origin called it fake news from the get-go. Another group said it hadn't gone far enough. A third said it was boring. Jamie took a day off and texted Miles. I forgot how hard it is to ride into a hurricane. Miles went to school on Monday and found the hallway buzzing with a moral argument he appreciated because it meant the students were still willing to argue. Callie approached after last bell. I showed my aunt. She said. She cried. She cried anyway. But she said thank you. She said it feels different when someone says the word harm out loud. I'm sorry I couldn't do more. Miles said. You did enough. Callie said. Sometimes it's not about solving. Sometimes it's about naming. He thought of that all day. He thought of it while he stayed late to staple the next packet and watch the sky go gray-blue again in the window's glass. He thought of it as he walked to his car and drove across the South Bridge, where the river worked at the pilings like a patient jaw. He turned onto his street. The screen door was open, and it wasn't the wind. The latch hung bent. He stepped with measured steps onto his porch and paused, listening to the quiet throb of his own blood in his ears. He picked up a length of stained wood his father had once used to prop open the garage door when the spring snapped. He stood, holding the stick in his breath, and pushed the door with his toe. From inside, a small voice said, Mr. Carter? It was Cameron, sitting on his kitchen floor with his back against the cabinet, crying so hard he hiccuped every fourth breath. Miles dropped the stick. He crouched, and all the fatherless and fathered parts of him rose to the surface like fish that had been waiting for the baited hook they could trust. What happened? He asked gently. I told them I was out, Cameron said, choking on the words. The crew. They said you can't quit a wave mid-surf. You'll drown and we'll watch. They sent me a link with my old posts cut into a confession. And they said, check your screen door. Miles's hands shook once and then steadied themselves. Do you want me to call your folks? He asked. Or the cops? My folks, Cameron said. Small. They think I make jokes all day. They don't know what it costs. Miles called. He made tea he knew Cameron wouldn't drink, but that made the air smell productive. He sat on the floor too, because some conversations deserve the dignity of being held at ground level. When Cameron's parents arrived too worried, people who looked like they'd run here without telling their bodies, first Miles explained. He didn't dramatize. He didn't soften. He used short sentences and middle school words and the truth. He watched them absorb it. The way grief and fear and anger are just different rhythms for the same song. After they left, after the tea cooled and the house settled, Miles thought of the open door in a new way. A screen door keeps the bugs out while letting the breeze in. It's a compromise designed for summer. It was never meant to be the only defense. That week, he rewrote his curriculum. He added a unit called the cost of the click. He invited Jamie to talk about journalism's duty to be dull and exact when the ocean wanted fireworks. He partnered with the librarian on a community night for parents, where they offered free coffee and a place to ask the questions people were afraid to type into search bars. He did not pretend the work would end. He did not tell his students to log off and move to the woods. He did, however, teach them to ask a new first question when confronted by a story that wanted to climb into their bloodstream. Who wants this to be true? In November, Lynn Walker appeared at a city council meeting where a tech incubator presented a proposal to lease municipal space. She wore a dark blazer and the same comm she had worn in the warehouse. She said the incubator would create jobs. She used words like innovation, pipeline, and retention. For a moment, nobody said anything honest. Then a hand rose in the back. It belonged to Callie. Can you describe your content moderation policy? She asked. Lynn blinked. We're not a content company, she said lightly. You're a company that makes attention, Callie said. Attention is content's mother. Attention decides what lives. So what are you planning to keep from living? A murmur rippled through the room. The question lodged itself and grew teeth. Other hands went up. A councilman asked if the incubator would pay into the school district's levy. A woman asked if the city had considered the impact on small businesses. Jamie took notes so quickly her pen squeaked. The incubator proposal failed by 1 vote. It was not a victory to put on a yard sign, but it was a marker, a stone in the river to rest a foot on while crossing. On a cold Saturday in December, when the light already felt tired by mid-afternoon and the snow came gentle and respectable like a churchgoer's whisper, Miles walked to the library. He brought a box of old tapes his mother had kept. On the 2nd floor, he donated them to the preservation lab, where a volunteer named Ethan converted community memories into digital format. Pick one to test, Ethan said. We can let it run while you browse. Miles chose Family Picnic 1991. He watched the opening frames the oaks. His mother's hand. He listened to the sound that time brands us with. The timbre of voices we didn't know we'd miss. He thought about the door again. Not the warehouse door. Not the broken latch. But the simple invention of a screen door that meant we could breathe without flies. He thought about how he had always assumed it kept things out. He wondered if it had been, all along, a device that helped us learn what to let in and what to keep. When he got home, he closed the door behind him and stood in his entryway as the furnace clicked on. He thought of his students, Callie with her questions like instruments, Cameron with his phone face down, the quiet boy in the lion's cap who had named the hunger to be the star of your own fear, and he smiled because he could not, for once, think of a better ending than this. Not a final defeat of the monster, but a town learning, all at once and imperfectly, to call a monster by its name before it asked for theirs. That winter, the Null Return channel posted 3 more videos. They were clever and cruel. They were weather and they were a choice. The community night at the library grew into a monthly thing, and then a weekly thing when a church opened its basement and the PDA brought casseroles. Kids showed up. Parents showed up. People who lived alone showed up. And nobody joked about it. The school board voted to add digital ethics to the state civics requirement. It made some people mad. It made others feel seen. It made Jamie write a column that got picked up by a wire service and reprinted in other towns with other rivers, other warehouses, other doors that were open because someone had decided open doors were easier to exploit than reinforced walls. In March, on the first day that the sun felt like a thing rather than a rumor, Miles stood in his classroom and built a slide for the last unit. He titled it with a sentence he wanted his students to carry longer than any test. Every story makes a demand on its listener. Your job is to decide if the demand is worthy of you. He clicked save. He turned off the lights. He walked into the hallway that smelled like older cleaning products and paper, the kind of smell that made him oddly hopeful. He held the door for a kid carrying too many textbooks and watched the wind lift the flag outside the glass, the cloth snapping back to shape after a gust. On his porch that evening, when he heard the soft slap of the screen door settling into its frame, he thought not of warnings, but of mercy, a commonplace invention, a compromise, an agreement to let air move while keeping the sharpest things out. And he thought of all the small ways people had shut it for each other lately, without theatrics, neighbors checking in, teachers rewriting lessons, kids asking harder questions, a reporter remembering to write a dull headline exactly right. It would never be enough, and it was already more than they'd had. He picked up the phone and texted his students a reminder about the community night's new topic, how to talk to relatives about videos that made them angry, and he included a joke he knew they'd grown at, equal parts dad and teacher. When the replies rolled in, he felt for a minute the faint sensation of standing on something sturdier than fear. He slept that night with the window cracked to let in the river's hush. The screen door held. The house warmed and cooled. A living thing. And when he dreamed not of pop-ups or reflections, but of his father's steady hand passing him the camera. "Hold it level," his father said in the dream. "Don't let it tell the story for you. You're the one who aims." He woke before dawn. He made coffee and stood at the kitchen window and watched the sky turn from steel to bruised peach to the sort of soft blue that makes promises. He did not check his phone first thing. He breathed. He wrote an email to Callie's aunt, attaching the school's grief counselor's schedule and a list of small grants for families of missing persons that Jamie had sent. He wrote a note to Cameron recommending a journalism fellowship for young creators who wanted to build better magnets. Then he opened his front door and listened. Somewhere downtown, the bakery mixers were whirring. Across the street, a neighbor's dog barked twice and gave up. The river moved unseen behind the trees. The screen door opened and closed as he carried the recycling to the curb. The satisfying snap of latch-on frame sounded like punctuation. This was not a horror story with a severed phone line or a haunted attic. It was a more embarrassing kind of terror, the one that asks you to be braver in public than you planned. The one that requires apologies and revisions and the humility to admit you believed a thing that made you feel special when it was. In the end, a salesman's pitch dressed up like prophecy. He could live with that. He tallied in his head the small victories. One kid who turned off his live. One aunt who cried and said thank you. One town meeting where a hand in the back changed the conversation. It wasn't everything. It rarely would be. But it was a way to hold a door for someone else and mean it. And in that ordinary, stubborn way, with the air moving and the flies kept mostly out, the town went on. And so did Miles. If this story made you think about violence and injustice, their subtle forms, and the way they get packaged as entertainment, share your take in the comments. Where should a community draw the line between free expression and exploitation? What responsibilities do creators, platforms, teachers, and neighbors have when fear is used to sell? Take a stand. Tell us where you draw your line and why. Your voice might be the door that shuts what doesn't belong inside.